Hi everyone. So finally got my sound stuff squared away. I hope everything records well, captures well. So today I'm reading chapter 31 from Occult Theocrasy by Lady Queensborough, Practical Politics. The game of politics is the pursuit of power. In all democracies, there are two separate organizations playing the political game. The open and visible one, the members of which hold office as members of a government, and the invisible one, composed of individuals who control this visible organization and in whom is vested the real power, the essence of which is finance, controlling the publicity which makes or unmakes its tools. The financial power may be used to promote truth or fallacies, good or evil, national prosperity or national ruin, but so long as human nature is what it is, so long as jealousy, greed, personal ambition, and expediency can sway the lives of men, so long will the rule of the invisible power prevail by methods inimical to the best interests of a nation. The strength of a democracy thus lies at the mercy of invisible leaders who, being nationally irresponsible, cannot be called to account for the consequences of the acts of the governments they control. This at the same time constitutes the inherent weakness of any form of government, the hypothesis of which is the control of both parties in the state, right and left, radical and conservative. By the same forces, then, only the puppets change while the rule of the individuals controlling the machine continues unhindered. Voters who wonder why their efforts have failed wonder in vain. As the dupes of a controlled publicity, their privilege of the vote is a farce. If all factions in a state can be controlled from one source, why should international control be impracticable? Italy, if one follows its history for the last 100 years, gives a sequence of good illustrations of such possibilities and affords us the chance to follow the progressive stages of Masonic centralization and imposition of the internationalism upon nations as conceived by Mazzini, Pike, Palmerston, and Bismarck. International control was Mazzini's dream. His cynical remark, "We aspired to corrupt in order to rule," leaves one little faith in the idealism of this patriarch of international Freemasonry. That he applied his motto is shown by the use he made of Francesco Crispi. As Palamengi Crispi writes, Crispi became personally acquainted with Mazzini in London in January 1855, but they had corresponded since 1850. When their golden dream of liberty and independence banished by the return of all the tyranny of the past, the bravest of the patriots had once more begun to conspire. While pondering the idea of founding a national committee in which the various regions of Italy should be represented, Mazzini also determined to form a fund for the carrying out of great enterprises. And as it is impossible to obtain large sums secretly from a few people, he worked out a plan for a national loan to be raised by the issue of bonds to be redeemed by a liberated Italy. The first act of the National Committee was to authorize the issue of such bonds to the amount of 10 million lire. In his youth, Francesco Crispi made a mistake, and blackmail made him a ruler of men. As the tool of Mazzini, he ruled Italy for many years, and as the ruler of Italy, he wielded the secret power of international masonry in accordance with the policy of his masters. According to Crispi, 33 degree, Crispi in palladism, brother versus Serafano Cioccolio, I don't know if I pronounced that, Ciocchiola, was born at Ribera in Sicily on October 4th, 1819. His father, Tommaso Crispi, a lawyer, destined him to the church, but in 1837 he married Felicita Val, a pretty young girl with whom he was infatuated. In 1856 he abandoned her for Rosalia Montmason, deserting the latter in 1878 to marry Lina Barbagallo, widow Capellani. At this period, he was openly accused of bigamy, and though challenged to do so, he never produced the documents necessary to prove the death of his first wife, Felicia Tavel. After his marriage in 1837, he practiced law, and in 1838 joined one of the numerous secret societies which in those days infested Sicily. Presently, he started his career as a political intriguer and conspirator, traveling over the world in his sinister business under different aliases and false passports, provided for him by Mazzini, who, in view of his confidential position as friend of the King of Naples, had bought his services as a spy. Domenico Margiata states in Francisco Crispi, son Envra Nefast, I'm sorry, I have such a problem with these words, that he found among the papers of his grandfather a member of Young Italy who had been condemned to death as the head of the conspiracy, which penalty he, however, successfully escaped. A telegram from Mazzini instructing the organization to give Crispi promptly 30,000 ducats to begin with on the account of the Neapolitan Committee of Young Italy, and to let him get to work. While at Malta in 1855, he joined the Masonic Lodge, Zetland, under English jurisdiction, from which he was shortly expelled for the theft of 800 francs from one of its members. He went to London shortly afterwards. Therefore, Lord Palmerston had returned to power by becoming an ardent admirer and fanatical follower of Mazzini. Crispi simultaneously entered the good graces of Palmerston, who was on the very best of terms with the Italian leader. In 1856, believing that Napoleon III, in cooperation with Cavour, was the secret arbiter of the destinies of Italy, and the greatest obstacle to the realization of his own republican schemes, Mazzini introduced Crispi to go to Paris. While he was there, a number of attempts were made on the life of the emperor, among others that of Orsini on January 14, 1858. Though strongly suspected of participation in these conspiracies by the police or Paris, no evidence for a direct charge of complicity against Crispi was ever obtained. However, it is known that he and Orsini had previously met in London, where the latter had shown him how to make the famous bombs, the use and manufacture of which Crispi afterwards taught his followers in Sicily. 1 second. By August 3rd, 1858, he was back in London, the Paris police having developed too great a zeal on his behalf during his sojourn in the French capital. At last, by 1860, the various Italian conspiracy crystallized into one. Everything was ready for the fulfillment of Mazzini's dream of the united Italy. Bertini, Bixio, and Crispi decided to go to Turin themselves to see General Garibaldi, and after the British minister, Sir James Hudson, had confirmed certain information on the conditions of Palermo, which had been furnished by the Genoese deputies, the general seemed at last inclined to take action. He ordered Bixio to Genoa to charter a ship, and Crispi to Milan to receive from Enrico Bazzana the arms and the money already subscribed. This subscription was begun by General Garibaldi himself, and in view of later developments, it is a significant fact that one of the contributions he received for the famous expedition of the 1,000 was the sum of 50,000 francs from the Jew Cornelius Hertz. 12,000 guns were in the hands of Massimo de Azeglio, then governor of Milan, who, by order of the government, surrendered them to the rebels. Finally, General Garibaldi arrived in Genoa on April 14th. On the 16th, Crispi returned to Turin, where he saw the Minister of the Interior, Farini, who, having by that time changed his mind concerning the Italian expedition, had ceased to be a dictator and had assumed the attitude of a diplomatic satellite of Cavour. He proved quite intractable. Back in Genoa, Crispy found La Farina again, this time with orders to report all developments to Cavour. Cavour warned not to interfere with Garibaldi, raised no obstacles to the progress of the plot. He only advised waiting for better news from the island of Sicily, and promised to cooperate with 1,000,000 guns as soon as the time for the expedition seemed propitious. Still, Garibaldi hesitated. The Sicilian news was contradictory. On April 26, Crispy received from Nicola Fabrizi a message from Malta reading, "Failure in the provinces and in the town of Palermo. Many exiles arriving at Malta on English ships." Luckily, a few days later, a communication from Palermo, published in the Gazette of Turin, told of the great proportions assumed by the insurrection in Sicily. This communication had been invented and written at Genoa by Crispy for the purposes of overcoming the last scruples of Garibaldi. One day, the 2nd of May, Crispy and Garibaldi were alone in a room looking seaward in the Villa Spinola Quarti. They were talking about the expedition. Crispy, as usual, was fighting the vacillations of Garibaldi. Suddenly the general interrupted him, saying, "You are the only one to encourage me in this enterprise. Everyone else tries to dissuade me. Why?" "Because I am profoundly convinced that it will be helpful to the fatherland, and that it will cover you with glory. I fear only one thing, the uncertainty of the sea." "I answer for the sea," said Garibaldi. "And I answer for the land," said Crispy. Garibaldi was persuaded, and the die was cast. After the victorious expedition of the 1,000 had placed the group of conspirators in power in Sicily, each was rewarded according to his merits, Crispy becoming Minister of Foreign Affairs. Cavour had died on June 6, 1861, poisoned, it is said, on May 28 by order of Mazzini. Until 1861, Crispy had cooperated wholeheartedly with the revolutionaries, but as time wore on, he began to think that it might be more to his personal advantage to serve the king than Mazzini. His plan was discovered by Mazzini's spies, and in 1862 the deputy of Castelvetrano found himself facing death for treason at the hands of his former friends and accomplices, under conditions that enslaved him. Oh, the page takes forever. I'm sorry. Page takes forever to turn. Under conditions that enslaved him body and soul forever after to the international sect. Early in April 1862, he attended a Freemasonic dinner of the Associations Emancipatrices at Turin. Suddenly he felt ill, very ill. Fire seemed to be burning within him. He was in the throes of the most appalling agony. Instead of offering assistance, the other guests began to laugh. Then one of them, rising, spoke to him severely in the following terms. "Francesco, you went to visit King Victor Emmanuel without telling us of your intention, and you offered him your secret services. You let him know that you were ready to go over at the first opportunity. Till then your opinions had been Republican. Well, that is treason. We have condemned you. You are poisoned. You are a dead man." The poison had indeed been administered in the bread. Among the organizers of the banquet was the baker Dolfi, who had formerly contributed to the expulsion of the Grand Duke of Tuscany, and who had become one of the members of the Radical Directing Committee. On this occasion Dolfi had kneaded the bread himself, and each guest had found his place at the table, marked by a small roll bearing his name, traced on its golden crust by a fillet of whitish dough. All the guests, agreeably surprised, had congratulated the baker for his delicate attention, but the piece of bread marked Crispy had been separately kneaded and contained the poison. Crispy realized full well that he was lost. He knew there was no escape, and that all the exits to the banquet hall were closed. Moreover, he was too weak to fight. Without recrimination, and in the throes of acute pain, he dropped into a chair upon which, writhing in agony, he awaited a lingering death. The others surrounded him, watching him in silence, with profound contempt. Suddenly, a door opened, a curtain was raised, and a man appeared. He advanced slowly. It was Mazzini. "Poor wretch," said he to the dying man, "I pity you." At these words Crispy looked up, his dim eyes gleaming suddenly, and he murmured feebly, "Yes, ambition made me betray, it is true. I was going to sell myself, but I die. Do not insult my agony. Do not mock me. I suffered too much." "I do not speak to you in derision," answered the Grand Master. "Francesco Crispy, I forgive you. Drink this and you are saved. You will be reborn." So saying, he forced his teeth apart and, pressing a small vial to the lips of the dying man, poured the counterpoison down his parched throat. After his last words, Crispy had collapsed. Some time passed. Was he still alive? He seemed a corpse. Little by little, sweat gathered on his face and hands. Then slowly his livid countenance regained some color. For a long time he seemed inert. Then his eyelids opened, and looking around with a stunned expression of incomprehension, he asked, "Where am I?" "You have returned from the realm of the dead," murmured Mazzini gravely. "Oh, yes, I remember now. Mercy, mercy," he added suddenly, recalling realities and clinging desperately to life. "I live indeed, master. It is not a dream." "You live, yes, Francesco, but henceforth you are more completely enslaved than the last of the Negroes for whose freedom they are fighting over there in America. You live again, and your ambition will be gratified. You will be minister of the monarchy. You will hold in your hands the reins of government, but without betraying us, without selling yourself. You will part from us, not privately, but publicly. We will denounce you, and while denouncing you, we will push you to power. It is the monarchy that you will betray by executing our orders. When we shall have made you minister of the crown, and you will obey us in all things, even should the orders we give you seem contradictory, even should their execution cause you to pass for a madman in the eyes of Europe. Yes, Francesco Crispy, from this day forward you belong to us, for you must never forget that, should you place us in a position where it might be expedient to cut short our own existence a second time, no power in the world could save you from the death, the sufferings of which you have known today. Live then for Masonry, fight royalty and the Church. You will be the grave digger of this House of Savoy. It is only an instrument for us, and we have condemned it to disappear after it has served our purpose." This plan of action was carried out. In 1864, Crispy, on orders from his master, became a royalist and duly denounced Mazzini. That is the explanation of his often incoherent and erratic policies in afterlife. Mazzini's promise was fulfilled, and Crispy became Minister of the Interior in 1878. In 1877, he had been on a tour to Paris, Berlin, London, and Vienna. In Paris, he had seen Thiers, Jules Favre, and Gambetta. In Germany, Prince Bismarck, with whom he already had an acquaintance of some years' standing, and who shared his aversion for France and the Roman Catholic Church. In England, Lord Derby and Mr. Gladstone, but the true purpose of his mission in these lands is still unknown. As a consequence of his interview with Bismarck at Salzburg, Italy, fearing France, threw herself into the hands of the Iron Chancellor. Germany henceforth was to hold her as a dog, ready to be set at either against Austria or France when it suited her purpose. The Triple Alliance was formed in May 20th, 1882. Crispy's accession to the ministry was therefore a victory of prime importance to the sect. After the death of Mazzini, in 1872, Adriano Lemmi took over the Masonic heritage, and along with the rest, his slave Francesco Crispy, who with the Jew borrowed Scilly, became his right-hand man. King Victor Emmanuel died on January 9, 1878, and was succeeded by Humbert I. That same year saw the death of Pope Pius IX and the accession to the papacy of Leo XIII. In 1884, Humbert I was initiated into Masonry as Knight Kadosh under the conditions of the greatest secrecy, and a lodge, that of Savoia Illuminata, was founded in his honor. In spite of his exalted Masonic position, The monarch's political information was always strictly censored by his Masonic superiors. From 1887 to 1891, and again from 1893 to 1896, Crispi acted the part of prime minister. In order to enable him to curry favor with the common people, Lemmy occasionally authorized him to execute political turnovers. The Grand Master Lemmy once said to Humbert, "Fear not, the socialism of Crispi will not last. It will provoke no riots. It is simply an electoral maneuver." And the king was much gratified at being so well informed. There, at least, the 33rd degree king was not deceived. If now and again Crispi resumed his revolutionary complexion, it was only to obtain the votes of those whom he persecuted mercilessly once he had obtained power. To him, a change of opinion was as easy as a change of shirt. In 1889 came the scandal. Oh, I'm sorry, I lost my place. Oh, there we go. In 1889 came the scandal of the Banca Romana, revealed as such through the efforts of Giovanni Giolitti, and in 1892 that of Panama involving another, namely the Grand Cordon of Cornelius' hats, any one of which would have swamped the political career of any unprotected individual. Crispi, though seriously implicated, was supported through an impossible situation by the Masonic Brotherhood. The Abyssinian War itself, the result of Masonic intrigue, was the terrible maneuver calculated to ruin the House of Savoy in the eyes of the Italian people. It was known that at the time of the disaster of Adowa, the succession of Adriano Lemmy to the Grand Mastership of the Grand Orient of Italy was open, and that competition for the position was keen. Some favored the candidacy of Bovio, others that of Nathan, later mayor of Rome, but Crispi had promised General Baratieri, a Masonic I don't know why they say it's supposed to be dignitary, but it's written dignitary. Okay, I goofed up. My eyes are deceiving me for some reason. Let me begin this sentence again. But Crispi had promised General Baratieri, a Masonic dignitary, that he should have the preference above all others, on condition that he win a victory over the Negus. Such an achievement would give Italy another Garibaldi, a popular hero, while simultaneously providing Crispi himself with a useful tool and the position of top dog, which had never been his before. But the disastrous defeat of his candidate by Menlek at the Battle of Adowa on March 2nd, 1896, resulted in the fall of Crispi, not that of the king. The agent of Lemmy had played his part, but the great game of the federated secret societies had only suffered a temporary setback. In 1900, King Humbert I was assassinated at Monza. Crispi died in 1901. The fate of Italy is the fate of all nations, governed by political rings. Italy in the 19th century seems to have been the vortex of the intrigue directed against Christianity, which today ravages the world, carrying in its wake a general disregard of all ideals, decency, duty, and loyalty. Liberty is corrupted into licentiousness, marital fidelity into perversion, equality of low standards, and fraternity into a brotherhood based on mutual slavery under the yoke of international finance. And the monster grows apace. Today it bestrides the world under the name of Bolshevism, but it is the same old monster, the hearsay of the first centuries of the Christian era and the Middle Ages, namely Gnosticism. So that was chapter 31. The next chapter 32 is about Adriano Lemmy, and I'm trying to figure out because my voice is cutting out. So I'm gonna close it down for now. See you next time. Thanks for listening.